all Dominicans at home and abroad on our agriculture, our economy, our foreign relations, our justice system, our governance, our international competitiveness, our education, our world class festivals and entertainment, sports, politics, regional cooperation, and much more. Globally positioning Dominica within the Caribbean.
Hello,
Hello,
everybody.
everybody.
Good
Good
evening.
evening.
I'm getting
I'm
a
getting
little feedback coming through to me here. Somebody's mic is open, but good evening and all, and a very, very warm welcome to you in Radio Land and Internet world at home and abroad. Thank you for choosing Q95 tonight. This is the Global View on Q. A very warm welcome, all of our Q family listeners at home and globally. I'm Sheridan Gregoire, Mr. G. It's Tuesday, April 18, 2023, the 16th Tuesday of 2023. I think I got it right tonight. It's 8 p.m., just about 2 minutes after 8 at Q95, the big station. We're live on Facebook and YouTube. Follow us at Q95 FM Radio. Check our website at www.q95da.com. Share the live, like our pages, get the latest breaking news and reviews as it happens, when it happens, only on Q95, the big station. We're continuing to revive the spirit of graciousness, of love and peace and prosperity and unity among our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. Tonight, I am absolutely delighted to have an exclusive interview with Dr. Irving Andre and President of the United Workers' Party, UWP, Lennox Linton. I will ask my distinguished guests to help us address some key issues now facing our country, our economy, our people, and to assist us with some answers as to preserving our democracy, our human rights and civil liberties, driven, of course, by free and fair elections that can only be guaranteed by appropriate electoral and campaign finance reforms. So the question is, as this gentleman just asked us, where do we go from here? So here are some issues. We will make the connection with the imperative for electoral reform, and Dominicans are right now struggling with the high cost of living and inflation, facing all this misconstrued propaganda about growth, and we know of the high debt to GDP ratio, a climbing national debt. But the question is, will the 2023-24 national budget, which is coming up sometime in July, will it provide some proactive measures to stop these terrible economic trends that will certainly cause loss of jobs and further impoverish ordinary, unsuspecting Dominicans? So Dominicans must now make a few major decisions to preserve their democracy, their human rights, and the civil liberties. As I've said, driven by free and fair elections, we will make that connection that can only be guaranteed by appropriate electoral and campaign finance reforms so as to secure the kind of governance that can create good paying jobs and reduce the high cost of living and massive inflation. My distinguished guest, Justice Dr. Irving Andre, UDLP Team Dominica Leader, President Lennox Linton, will help us with those. Where do we go from here? Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Andre, Lennox, all of you in Radio Land, listen at home and abroad. King Austin asked in his song titled Progress, we just heard it. When we look around, what do we see? In Dominica, do we see mysterious buildings going up in the air? Offshore companies springing up everywhere? Degrading lyrics here and there? Dictators calling themselves Democrats? Our callers will tell us what they see around them in Dominica. Whether they see electoral laws being laid threadbare, efforts to perpetrate bribery and cheating to protect people's election winning legacy persevere so that they can stay in power forever, efforts to enable themselves to spend millions before the official election campaign financing period, prior to the date the election is declared to the public, and then restrict the opposition parties to only 3 weeks for their campaigns. But our plans also are afoot to prevent equal access to all media by giving power and discretion to government controlled media and the Electoral Commission to sanction and forestall airing of opposition parties' media information, education, and PR content. Are these some of the things that you see around us? Call and tell us. So, will Dominicans just blindly walk the path towards the cryptocurrency precipice as their democracy and freedom continues to be eroded? Dominicans, as we always say, are the only ones who can save themselves. Every Dominican should heed the writing on the wall and the signs of the destruction, signs of any destruction at all of their nation. Is it time for Dominicans to stand and demand what is rightfully theirs? But will electoral reform by itself secure free and fair elections and good governance? Or will it require mass peaceful gatherings of Dominicans who press the demand for real jobs and real growth and for campaign finance transparency and accountability on a level electoral playing field? Only time will tell, but please stay tuned with us. Call and have your say, as you do every Tuesday. But what about the income and growth of ordinary Dominican people and Dominican family households in the face of foreign contractors and workers receiving and repatriating all of the benefits? My very distinguished guest tonight, Dr. Andre and President Lennox Linton, are eminently qualified, I believe, to bring clarity to these issues. And I'm sure they will help us unravel the connection between achieving these goals and implementing electoral and campaign finance reforms. So, is it now time, as I ask, that Dominicans stand firm and demand what is rightfully theirs? Will it require masses of Dominicans gathering peacefully to demand electoral reforms that will ensure free and fair elections to secure that good governance that is so yearned for? Or will Dominicans really and truly blindly walk to that path, or the crystal path to this precipice? Will they do that? That does not sound like a very good choice to me. Are Dominicans ready to show some resolve and the political will to ensure genuine electoral reform and campaign finance reforms? We did hear Mr. Skerritt promise to publish Sir Dennis Byron's Phase 2 report and hold national consultations before tabling any electoral reform legislation in Parliament. The Constitution requires that the Electoral Commission and the Chief Elections Officer must be consulted before any such legislation is tabled in Parliament. Has that been done yet? We'll wait and see what comes up at the end of the month, whether anything will be placed in the order paper in the parliamentary session that's coming up. We hope that it won't be, because that consultation has not yet taken place. But meantime, the Global V&Q is continuing to prepare to embrace Dominica's 45th anniversary of independence this November 23. I keep talking about that because this is a landmark time for us in Dominica. 45 years. We look forward to free and fair elections to preserve our democracy on the occasion of our 45th anniversary of independence. So wherever you are in Dominica, in the region and globally, tell your friends or your associates, tune in, call in, and join the conversation. You get the answers to your questions tonight, I'm sure. Be part of the solution. And as usual, a huge shout out, hugs, much love, appreciation, and a big thank you to our healthcare providers, frontline workers, police and fire officers, teachers, doctors, nurses, and other public and private sector persons. We welcome every Dominican and friend of Dominica. We embrace you wherever you are tonight, every nook and cranny, in every village, every community in Dominica, in the region and globally. Again, thank you, Sherwin, keeping us on the air. Thank you, Lambi, on the console for tonight. For us, he'll take your calls a little later, but you can find all our numbers on the homepage of our website at www.q95da.com. But Lambi will also give you the numbers later. So the People's Voice hopefully will is the priority tonight. So please call us. So let's get started. I want to go first to Justice Dr. Irving Andre to get the ball rolling tonight on the best way forward to get the people of Dominica out of the dilemma of what appears to be a never-ending cycle of poverty and in some cases mendicancy that we are witnessing. Dr. Andre, let me yield to you right now.
Good evening, Mr. G. Let me commend you for that wonderful introduction. Good evening to Lambi. Good evening to Sherwin. Good evening to Mr. Linton. This is obviously a day the Lord has made because we're alive, we're well, we can speak, we can hear, we can articulate our views even oftentimes in the most depressing of circumstances. But we have to give thanks that we are afforded the wherewithal to do so. These are troubling times, quite frankly. The state of the nation is being besieged from all sides. And it is a testament to the resilience of our fellow Dominicans that some of them maintain hope. They maintain the courage, the energy to make their voices heard. As long as they do so, there is hope. The enormity of the situation is such that I have prepared a little script because I can't trust myself to remain on script. So bear with me while I articulate some views which I think are pertinent to these trying times. In this post-Linton season, when we reflect on life, we reflect on suffering, we reflect on death and resurrection, it may be appropriate to refer to Dominica as Our Lady of Perpetual Sorrows. It has been imprisoned in a cell of perpetual suffering without regard to its physical or spiritual well-being. When I look around, Mr. G, in the manner of King Austin, what I see is as much depressing as what I don't see. I therefore see that, for example, our parrots, the symbol of all that is beautiful about our environment, have been sold. Our passports are being sold to the highest bidder. Our protected lands are given away to those who have benefited from the sales of Dominican passports. Our physicians, Dr. Pascal, Dr. Schillingford, Dr. Christian, Dr. Dangleben, have been prohibited, imagine that, from offering their considerable skills to those who are in medical need. Our people are deprived of basic help or relief from hardship. Our productive potential, Mr. G, is being destroyed. Progress has become an endangered species in our island. Prophets are being persecuted. Pilate washes his hands while persons of different political stripes are crucified. But I also see the defiance of a few, those who plant trees of hope, those who walk without looking back like Lot's wife, those who speak openly about a time when victimization is no more, bearing false witness is no more, or where legitimate protest should not be greeted by state persecution. And so while we speak of electoral reform, we are mindful of the broader context of this topic. That is the well-being of our democracy and that of our people. The ability of our people to achieve their goals, to work in their country, to care for their children, to send them to school, to set up their businesses, to produce their crops, to sell their produce, to compete on a level playing field, to compete for contracts to build Dominica, to receive assistance in their hour of need. Electoral reform. Let me say from the outset that in my view, we do not need electoral reform over and beyond the need for campaign finance reform. What we need, more than anything else, is a reform or replacement of those leaders who have refused to comply with Dominica's electoral laws. We need not electoral reform, but a rejection of those who have been derelict in enforcing the laws govern eligibility to vote, governing the integrity of the voters list, the laws criminalizing bribery and cheating in the electoral process. That is the reform that we need. We need to reform the evil within, a reform of the greed that prompts persons to manipulate the laws for their own selfish ends. We need to replace greed with godliness, generosity, and with goodness. Bear these comments in mind, Mr. G, as I outline what I perceive to be the major concerns about phase 2 of the proposed Sir Byron electoral reforms. As I do, ask yourself the following questions. 1, do they seek to replace greed with generosity and goodness? Do they promote adherence to Dominica's electoral laws, or do they provide loopholes for the further desecration of those laws? Do they promote the intrinsic value of every Dominican resident on the island, or do they cynically seek to devalue that vote? What do I see when I look around the gilded or golden pages of electoral reform that are being handed to us as if on tablets of stone? And here is what I see after a quick perusal of those proposals enshrined or set in phase 2 of that reform. I will focus on a few areas, not that these are the only areas of concern, but these are the areas that cuts like a knife. Let us start with the obligation of state-owned media. And sometimes and oftentimes, you have to look beyond the glitter. You have to look beyond the trinkets that shine brightly, not only in the night, but in the daylight, because beneath that glitter lie a dark reality that, quite frankly, is detrimental to the well-being of the state. Here is what Section 50, subsection 1 of the proposed legislation indicates, quote, subject to subsection 2. Now, I know there's somebody nicknamed subsection. That is not the person I'm speaking of. I'm speaking about subsection 2 in the proposed legislation. A political party and any independent candidate participating in an election shall have access to the state-owned media services during the campaign period. Now, that sounds wonderful, doesn't it? Let me read it again. They shall have access to the state-owned media services during the campaign period. But here is what subsection 2 says. Quote, the commission shall, after consultations with the political parties concerned, independent candidates and the officers responsible for the state-owned media services, they shall monitor the equitable allocation of airtime during the campaign period. So here, these proposed reforms, or the proponents, here they are committing a cardinal electoral sin. They are placing access to the media to be controlled by the Electoral Commission. Do you see anything wrong with that picture? Do you see anything wrong given who controls, given the majoritarian view on the Electoral Commission? Do you see them go into DBS and tell it Cecil Joseph or whoever is there? You have to ensure that the opposing parties get equal time. Do you see them doing in your lifetime, undertaking that obligation? What is Sir Byron seeing when he proposes such a provision in terms of access to media during an election? I don't know what he's seeing, but I'll tell you one thing. He is not seeing what is in the best interests of free and fair election or free access to media. Here is what he says in subsection 4, quote, for the purpose of giving effect to this section, the commission may, in writing, issue directives to the media. Do you understand that? The commission may, they don't have to, but they may issue directives to the media. Let me ask you this. And I know there hasn't been legislation governing their conduct, at least not legislation of this type. What directives have they given thus far to DBS in terms of access to that media? You tell me. Perhaps the only access the opposing party has is the announcement, a death announcement of someone who supports the opposition. Nothing else. There's all kinds of cynical, capricious excuses as to why access to DBS radio is being denied. And we understand why. Because there is no commitment. There is no commitment to that type of access. And in my view, to compound the problem, the proposal in the legislation is to place authority and the discretionary authority to the commission in ensuring that access is equitable, access to the state media. And let me ask you this, because I don't know, what penalties What penalties exist if the DBS radio doesn't grant equitable access to persons, opposition parties in Dominica? What remedy, what penalty is imposed on them? That they put on the mango tree and eat all the mangoes that they want? What penalty is being prescribed? I haven't seen it, and probably I didn't read enough, but it is conspicuous by its absence. So one of the central components of free and fair elections, access to the media, the ability for every party to have an equal opportunity to articulate its views, that has been significantly compromised. So it's deja vu all over again. Now, what about campaign expenditure for political parties? Let me read to you what is being proposed. And I must say that my eyesight is getting a little bad, and I must confess that I have to use a magnifying glass. But I took a long, hard look at this provision. It's section 64, subsection 1. And here's what it says. I'll try to break down the language so that we all understand what we're talking about. Quote, where a political party contests one or more constituencies in an election, it shall not incur expenditure on election expenses during the reporting period in excess of the sum of $5 million, that's in squared brackets, or, now here's the kicker, or such other sum as the commission may specify by order, subject to affirmative resolution after consultation with the political parties. That's what they're proposing. They're saying that where a political party contests one or more constituencies in an election, it shall not incur expenditure on election expenses during the reporting period in excess of the sum of $5 million, or such other sum as the commission may specify by order, subject to consultation with the political parties. There's at least 3 problems with this with this provision. And these problems collectively indicate that this provision is a complete waste of time in terms of imposing limits on electoral expenditure that would help create a level playing field. Problem number 1. You note that the section makes reference to the phrase during the reporting period. And some of your listeners, Mr. Jimmy, ask, what is the reporting period, Nagaso? What is he talking about? Whereas here is how that phrase is defined in section 54 of the proposed legislation. Quote, reporting period means the period commencing on the first day of a campaign period and ending 181 days after the end of the campaign period. So let me repeat this. The reporting period. It means the period commencing on the first day of a campaign period and ending 181 days after the end of the campaign period. What is the first day of the campaign period? The first day of the campaign period is the day after the public announcement that an election will be held. Now, let me give you an example. You remember the last, well, I hate to call it a general election, really, because the speed with which it was undertaken suggests that it was nothing but a travesty. Now, I hope somebody correct me, but I believe, I may be wrong, that the announcement for the December 6, 2022 election was made sometime in November. I can't remember if it's November 20th, but it's a date in November. So applying that provision, that proposed provision of section 64, then the reporting period would commence the day after or the day of the announcement of the elections. So between that date and for a period after the elections, the maximum amount of money to be spent for a party that contests more than two constituencies is $5 million. Now, that is a significant sum, but that's not the problem. Even assuming without deciding that the UWP or any other party can raise that amount of money in so short a time, that is not even the start of the problem. Bear in mind what happened during that last call for people to vote. Can't call it an election. What happened the very next day after that public announcement, Mr. G? The very next day, electoral elections paraphernalia were all over Dominica. Billboards, posters, you name it, as if by magic. Perhaps one of those pastors who've been singing the praises of the political directorate created a miracle and they just appeared miraculously. What it meant was very simple. All that preparation had taken place outside of the reporting period. All those bands, DJs, whoever, who were contracted to participate in the campaign were hired long before the reporting period started. So there you had a situation where literally hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars were spent before the reporting period. So this proposed legislation does not eradicate that obscene degree of spending. It doesn't. It does absolutely nothing. So that type of section will not in any way fetter the ability of the directorate to spend an indiscriminate amount of money on elections. Thirdly, actually, you have given the commission the discretion of deciding some other sum in terms of the amount of money that could be spent in a reporting season, a reporting period. If hypothetically, the commission increased that recommended $5 million to 10, who will that serve? Whose benefit? Who will such an increase benefit? Isn't that a built-in inequitable proposal regarding limits on campaign expenditure for political parties? So far from dealing with the mischief of indiscriminate and unchecked spending during elections, this provision, as it is worded, enables it. Rather than curb it, it enables it. Because one, there's no limits on spending before the reporting session. Two, you are given the discretion to increase the amount to be spent during the reporting period. You are given that discretion to who? The commission. The very same commission that has done nothing. The very same commission that has turned its back at electoral chicanery during the last 3 cycles. The very same electoral commission that has refused to cleanse the voters' list, not even of dead people. And there could be a cynical reason for that. There is not enough room in the Rosal Cemetery to bury all these dead people who are on the electoral list. Probably there's no room. That's why they haven't done anything. But this is as cynical as it gets. And it's, well, let me reserve my views. But it's a mystery as to why a proposed amendment to existing legislation to cure the mischief of electoral spending, that mischief being the profligate spending by one entity, it is a mystery while the proposed amendment does precious nothing to deal with that issue. And that, in my view, is a telling indictment of this proposal. The proposals also talk about limits on contribution. It also talks about those who should not give contributions from what is called an impermissible contributor under Section 57. Let me give you a few examples. 57(1)(a). Any foreign or Commonwealth state or any agent of such state, whether directly or indirectly. B, a public institution as defined in Section 2 of the Integrity in Public Office Act. An entity whose existence is or activities are illegal under any law, including Mondrian, we would imagine. An entity whose existence is or activities are illegal under any law. Are we referring to that fellow son, whatever his name? A person or an entity whose identity is not disclosed to the recipient of the contribution. Remember years ago, it's after the fact we found out that I think it's Bahamian Susan Oldie had provided $400,000 to some bogus organization for good governance or whatever the name was. And it was senior counsel Tony Astafan who disclosed, had to keep his mouth shut, that was used for an election campaign. And it raises the question, who and how is the commission going to police those sections of the proposed legislation? It talks about disclosure, but that's all it does. It talks about the disclosure each organization or political entity has the obligation to disclose where they get some money. But didn't someone tell us it's not your damn business? You think that attitude is going to change overnight? You think some holy water from some renegade priest is going to change that? The attitude will remain. The attitude has been molded in stone. The attitude continues and it persists because the attitude is such that there's a belief that it is not the business of a concerned citizen or patriot to know where monies are coming from to fund a general election. Bear in mind what I said. It is not the laws that needed reforming. It is those who refuse to enforce the law that should either be reformed or replaced. That is the malady that plagues Dominica worse than the virus when it first manifested itself in the year 2020 or thereabouts. What about bribery and treating? What about it? Bear in mind, in the last 3 election cycles, accusations of bribery and treating persisted. Bear in mind, in December of 2019, no Dominican had ever seen so many airplanes on the tarmac at the Melville Hall Hospital, Douglas Charles Airport, whatever. At that particular time of year during the election. Coincidence? Complicity. They had been brought to carry voters who lived abroad to vote. Some of them came through the back door from Guadeloupe and Martinique. And bear in mind the famous declaration that is just a part of our culture, breaking the law. If we Dominicans believe that breaking the law is part of our culture, what do you expect the people in Guadeloupe and Martinique and Antigua to think about Dominicans and St. Croix? They have a propensity to break the law. So they came. They came because their passages were paid. Free airline ticket, free boat ticket, a free Pipwi ticket from some islands. Many of them, I don't know how many, got little donations, spending money. Some of them didn't. In fact, some of them were almost stranded in Dominica after they cast their vote. That, under any reasonable definition of the law of bribery as it exists, is a criminal act. Is a criminal act. So bear that in mind. And here is what the proposed legislation, listen carefully, with respect to curing that mischief, with respect to dealing with that problem that has diminished the value of the vote of Dominicans resident at home, those who have not received any help, those who are unemployed while foreigners are shipping millions of dollars from Dominica to elsewhere, why they're being overlooked, while even if they have the skills, they cannot receive an equal opportunity to work. Here is what the proponents, those who seek to change Dominican laws, here is what they're proposing with respect to treating. A person commits the offense of treating under this act if the person, quote, A, corruptly, by himself or herself or by any other person, either before, during, or after an election, directly or indirectly gives or provides or pays wholly or in part the expenses, now listen carefully, of giving or providing any food, and that includes black pudding, drink, entertainment, or provision to or for any person for the purpose of corruptly influencing that person or any other person to vote or to refrain from voting at the election or on account of that person or any other person having voted or refrained from voting at the election. Oh, it sounds so beautiful, doesn't it? It criminalizes anyone, listen carefully, who gives or provides any food, drink, whether it's BB or any other drink, entertainment, all that's wonderful, or provision to or for any person for the purpose of corrupting, influencing. Is there something missing in that list, Mr. G? Can you think of anything that is missing? You tell me. What is missing in that list? Transportation. Transportation by boat, by airplane, by pipui. It is conspicuous by its absence. What kind of mission state is this? That has been the main way in which our electoral laws have been violated over the last 3 election cycles. And there is not a single reference. There is not a single reference to transportation. What is, you know what, let me not get off, I don't want to get off script. Not one. No mention of anyone who provides any free transportation by air or by sea or by pipui, which is a different type of configuration, as being an act that is covered by the definition of treating. But probably I'm too hasty, for God's sakes. Probably it is mentioned elsewhere, probably under the definition of bribery. So why don't we take a look under the definition of bribery? Probably I'm speaking prematurely. Probably it's there. I just haven't read it yet. But here's what they describe as bribery under Section 81 of the proposed legislation. A person commits the offense of bribery under this act if the person, A, directly or indirectly by himself or herself or by any other person on his or her behalf, gives, lends, or agrees to give or lend, or offers, promises, or promises to procure, or to endeavor to procure any money or valuable consideration to or for an elector, or to or for any person on behalf of an elector, or to or for any other person in order to induce blah, blah, blah. Same old story. Now, someone may argue that, well, once you talk about valuable consideration, that implies buying a free ticket for somebody. But why leave the legislation open to interpretation? Because some of these folk will tell you that if there is no mention specifically of giving free passage or free transportation or paying the transportation by boat or airplane to come to Dominica to vote, that constitutes the offense of bribery or treating. Then if there's no mention, then the legislation or those who enacted the legislation had no intention of including them. Why leave that loophole open? Why create this huge hole in the legislation that you can drive a Mack truck or a Bedford truck for that matter? Why create a loophole to be exploited by those who are exploiting the legislation today, that the existing legislation permits Dominicans who've been living abroad for 10, 20, 25 years to come to vote because they come to Dominica every summer to buy bakes, to take a sea bath, to fry some turtle crabs. That is the ridiculous interpretation that is presently being given to our present legislation. So why create that gap in the legislation, that lacunae in the legislation to permit that violation of the legislation? Tell me why. Tell me why. It's an old Dominican calypso which had that verse as a refrain. Why? Why create holes which permit the violation of those provisions that you are seeking to enact to create a level playing field in Dominica's electoral laws? Why? Because the piper has to be paid. There has to be justification. And bear in mind, as probably Mr. Linton might tell you, the attitude towards proposals for electoral reform, and ask yourself what conclusions could be drawn from that attitude. The only conclusion, reasonable one, the only reasonable inference to be drawn from that evidence is there is absolutely no commitment to free and fair elections and to electoral reform that reflect the best practices that are evident throughout the Eastern Caribbean and elsewhere. It's the only reasonable conclusion to be drawn from the evidence. And so I ended by repeating the question that I posed after listening to that song, which Mr. G had the foresight to play. When I look around, what do I see? That is the landscape that I see before me, barren, devoid of any fertility in terms of the tenets of a true democracy in Dominica. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Andre. Well, and Dr. Andre, you raise a few issues there, and I'm hoping that Mr. Linton, when he's making his submission, which I know will be substantial, certainly I've had my concerns as well about these issues, Lennox. And the big issue for me is who is going to enforce those laws? We have had an IPO, had to enforce laws. People had to report. People didn't report. What happened to the IPO? It kind of disappeared into thin air. We're not hearing about it anymore. You know, it was reconstituted and so on. So who's going to enforce those laws? And that is why I asked the question. In order to get free and fair, and you of all people, Lennox, you'll recall very clearly that the only reason why we are here talking about electoral reform today is because there was a famous email that said there was madness taking place down there. We have to stop it, and it's been stopped. I do not think there is any commitment to creating a level playing field through electoral reform. I don't think there is any commitment for that. So even if laws are passed and you get the good law, who will enforce? I do not think it can be left to the Electoral Commission to enforce those laws. It will not happen once it is constituted the way it is, with the government having a majority of the influence on that commission. Over to you, Lennox.
Good evening, good evening, Sheridan, Gregoire, Mr. G. Thank you
Yeah.
very much for the invite. Justice Andre, good evening to you. Lambi, good evening to the listeners of Q95 far and wide. Mr. G, you can hear me, I assume, right?
Yeah, you so loud and clear, man. I don't know
Okay, all right. You can hear me loud and clear. Very
what
good.
you act like that, but it sounded so powerful, man.
All right. So I thank you very much, and thank you very much, Dr. Andre, for your introduction. I wanted, though, Sheridan, as we get into discussion tonight, to go back a bit and to set some context for where we are right now, because we're actually discussing proposals for reform from the consultant that has been at work since August of 2020. That's heading into 3 years now. So we've seen first draft that tells us about.
One sec, Lennox. Somebody's mic is open. I don't know whether it's Irving. If you could mute your mic. You're right. Thanks a lot, Irving. Go ahead.
We have seen a first draft report on recommendations for amending the Registration of Electors Act, which bring on board ID cards for voting and the cleansing of the voters list for a process of confirmation, which has some issues associated with it, having regard to the persons from Dominica on the register who've been living overseas for more than 5 years, and whether they will remain qualified to be on the list, because now the proposal suggests that you can be considered not to be absent from Dominica if you have been in Dominica for an aggregate of 90 days over the 5-year period, which is an absurdity and which goes against the residency criteria that placed the person on the voters list in the first place. So while the legislation as proposed is coming up with something to deal with the cleansing of the list and accurate list of voters, there are concerns emerging at the same time as to whether or not we will have a truly accurate register of electors, and other issues regarding whether the confirmation of voters can be done overseas and whether you'll have enrollment centers, which opens it up to all sorts of abuse from a ruling party that has been against reform for many, many years. And so with these proposals before us for discussion now, before the matter goes to Parliament, it is important that the government understands clearly where the mind of the nation is insofar as its electoral process is concerned and the things that need to happen. It is not that the things that need to happen are any secret, because we have been having these discussions for many years, and there are a number of eminent individuals and groups that have been involved in that. So I wanted Sheridan to go back a bit and to start tonight with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 21.3, Resolution 217 of the UN General Assembly, adopted in December of 1948. Quote, "The will of the people shall be the basis of the authority of government. This will shall be expressed in periodic and genuine elections, which shall be by universal and equal suffrage, and shall be held by secret vote or by equivalent free voting procedures," end of quote. Now, we, the people of Dominica, believe in the values of fundamental human rights, freedom, the equality and dignity of persons, participatory and representative democracy, and the creation and maintenance of lawfully constituted authority, the Constitution, our supreme law, from 1978 provides for these values, for regular and periodic parliamentary elections, as well as for the entitlement of duly qualified persons to be registered to vote in any such elections, and to challenge election results. Regular and periodic free and fair elections are part of the foundation of this basic structure of how we, the people, have agreed to live. And you know, it is through free and fair elections that we, the people, transfer the power to govern our affairs to persons offering themselves to serve the public good in parliament, in government. Free and fair election is fundamental to a democracy, and the electoral process must at all times be fit for the sacred purpose of electing government of the people, by the people, for the people. Consequently, any election to facilitate, protect, and safeguard the sovereign will of the people of Dominica, conducted contrary to constitutional principles and the rule of electoral laws, will amount to a subversion of the people's will to place the governance of their affairs in the hands of masqueraders with no lawful authority to represent the people and no responsibility to be accountable to them. This is our sad reality. Our electoral process is broken, it is compromised, it has been for some time. Over the past 4 election cycles, it has been hijacked by political interest to deliver results only in their favor. It is unfit for the purpose of letting the people decide by the majority votes of conscience who their government should be. And so we, the people, have a duty to do whatever is necessary to be done to bring the electoral process to right order, and thereby rescue the people's right to choose their government from those who have captured it in their mission to plunder the resources of state without let or hindrance. We need these reforms. We have needed them for a number of years. At paragraph 77 of its July 2022 ruling on the 2019 electoral matter in Dominica, the Caribbean Court of Justice, the CCJ, our apex court, reminds us, quote, without such free and fair elections, the preambular value of the creation and maintenance of and respect for lawfully constituted authority would be fatally undermined. The consequences of such a denial that a reflection on Caribbean history demonstrates include loss of legitimacy, public unrest, and even revolt. In contemporary terms, free and fair elections are so fundamental to the democratic way of life that without it, the very legitimacy and sovereignty of the constitutional state is brought into question. Constituted as is by the people of Dominica. In this regard, it is worth reminding ourselves, the will of the people shall be the basis of the authority, the legitimacy of government. Now, since the election of 2005, the United Workers' Party has been advocating for reform of the electoral process in the interest of free and fair elections. In Dominica, the Electoral Commission is the creature of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Dominica. It is bound by the principle of constitutional supremacy in an assignment to duty ex section 38(1) of the Constitution, whereby it, quote, shall be responsible for the registration of voters, for the purpose of electing representatives, and for the conduct of election of representatives and senators, and shall have such powers and other functions relating to such registration and election as may be prescribed by law, end of quote. The powers and the functions of the Electoral Commission are prescribed in the House of Assembly Elections Act and in the Registration of Electors Act, both of which now have been the subject of review during the consultation exercise of Sir Dennis Barron. And both these pieces of legislation are now proposals on the table for reform of both of these pieces of legislation. We have seen the proposals for the Registration of Electors Act. We expect that sometime soon the proposals for the House of Assembly Elections Act will be available. Section 5611 of the Constitution mandates that in the exercise of its functions under this Constitution, the Commission shall not be subject to the direction or control of any other person or authority, end of quote. Members of the Commission are sworn to exercise its powers and discharge its functions, quote, without fear or favor, affection or ill will, and to honor, uphold, and preserve the Constitution. While we're on the Electoral Commission, briefly, let me say that in response to the suggestion or the talk going around that there's a meeting of the Parliament on Tuesday next week that will address electoral reform in some shape or form, Section 51 of the Constitution provides that, quote, every proposed bill and every proposed regulation or other instrument having the force of law relating to the registration of electors for the purpose of electing representatives or to the election of representatives and senators shall be referred to the Electoral Commission and to the Chief Elections Officer at such time as shall give them sufficient opportunity to make comments thereon before the bill is introduced to the House, or, as the case may be, the regulation or other instrument is made. I'm not in the Parliament. I don't know specifically what the Parliament is discussing next week. I'm just aware that a meeting has been announced for the 25th of April. And in light of the fact that there was talk that the government would be going to Parliament in April with amendments to the election laws as proposed by the Sir Dennis Barron consultancy, that's now in the air. I don't know whether the Electoral Commission has received the bills that the government may be intending to submit to the Parliament or the debate in the Parliament next week. I don't know any of that. All I'm doing is pointing to the constitutional provision that prior to going to Parliament with the bills, the Commission must receive them in such time that will allow the Commission to make comments on the bill to the government before it goes to the Parliament.
Let me just maybe interject here, Lennox, that according to my understanding, there is no appearance of that matter on the order paper so far.
Okay.
The items on there are items on the other paper, but this one does not appear to be there.
Yeah.
Will appear later.
I am putting that on the table in terms of the constitutional provision, just in case. All right.
True. Very true.
Now, in 2008, the Electoral Commission decided to proceed with two elements of reform: a clean, accurate voters list and ID cards for voting. An advisor to the head of the Dominican Labour Party government at the time condemned the electoral reform decision as madness going on at the Commission that would interfere with the re-election legacy of Roosevelt Skerrit. That term, interfere with the re-election legacy of Roosevelt Skerrit, is important because it has come through the years unscathed. The re-election legacy of Roosevelt Skerrit has not been interfered with. And one of the questions we need to ask ourselves is whether there's any effort at play right now to ensure that this reform exercise does not in itself interfere with the re-election legacy of Roosevelt Skerrit. 15 years and 4 election cycles later, the basic reforms proposed and committed to by the Electoral Commission have not materialized, notwithstanding widespread protest and solution-oriented civil society interventions. And so, as I said, Roosevelt Skerrit's re-election legacy has remained intact. In December of 2014, the Commonwealth Observer Mission concluded that the general election in Dominica was free, but was not necessarily fair due to multiple instances of cheating and bribery, including the transportation of electors to the island to vote and the apparent abuses of incumbency, including a lack of impartiality in the provision of public services. The nation recalls that the Dominica Labour Party regime of Roosevelt Skerritt used the resources of the state and projects resulting from the expenditure of public funds as campaign tools to corruptly, improperly, and unduly influence voters and thereby gain political advantage. Millions of dollars were moved from the public purse through village councils and special pro-Dominica Labour Party community organizations to the control of DLP candidates for distribution to voters as bribes. In December of 2019, the conduct of the election violated the principles of the Constitution and the electoral laws of the Commonwealth of Dominica. It was not free, it was not fair. The Dominica Labour Party emerged as the beneficiary of an 18-3 result stolen through illegalities and irregularities that were deliberately engaged to pervert democracy and subvert the sovereign will of the people. In the opinion of the Caribbean Court of Justice, quote, there remain grave areas of concern about how the process of these 2019 elections was conducted. Future elections in Dominica ought not to proceed with these or similar taints. In December of 2022, following public announcement of a plan to implement electoral reform recommendations, we had a sham election boycotted by 69% of voters in Dominica with the same tainted electoral process. The Organization of American States, OAS Observer Mission at the elections advised, and I quote, it is clear that Dominica cannot proceed to another election under the current rules. It will therefore be essential to have a new electoral framework in place before the next poll. The mission encourages the authorities of Dominica to proceed with the planned consultations and legislative changes now. Now was December of 2022. And the nation will also recall that there could have been electoral reform prior to the 2019 election, when the Prime Minister, under pressure from the electorate, invited the OAS, the Commonwealth Observers, and the CARICOM observers to send a joint team in to advise on reforms that could be engaged before the 2019 elections. They came in, they made those recommendations for reform, they were tossed aside because it was deemed, no doubt, that they were going to interfere with the re-election legacy of Mrs. Skerritt, and so they were tossed. The Electoral Commission at that time was attempting to do or committed to do a reconfirmation of voters on the list in order to clean the register of voters. It required $300,000 to pay the enumerators to go around and do the work and some other related matters. The government refused to provide the money, and so the Electoral Commission could not proceed. So it's not that we could not have had reform, it's that reform has been consistently frustrated. Now, after the 2019 election, Mr. Skerritt indicated that there would be reform, and so Dennis Byron came into the picture. As I said, this engagement started somewhere in August, September of 2020. So it's heading into 3 years. And that consultation had before it specific recommendations. I speak for us in the United Workers' Party. We've been with this for a long time. We proposed reforms to include accurate register of voters, meaning a total re-registration of all eligible voters on the basis of which a new register of voters will be issued. We propose all the re-registrations must be done by the Commission exclusively in Dominica and must be subject to existing residency criteria for voter registration. We propose voter identification cards, picture ID cards for all eligible voters on the new register of voters who will be obligated to use the cards as identification during elections. And we said all ID cards for voting must be issued by the Commission exclusively in Dominica. We proposed provisions for enforcement of the rule of law against bribery, treating, personation, illegal voting, and election offenses in general. We proposed specific provisions for voters by electors who are living overseas, so that there could be lawful facilitation of registered eligible voters living overseas to vote in general elections in Dominica, that effectively discontinues the corrupt, illegal practice of a political party pay millions of dollars from undisclosed sources to transport thousands of voters from various locations to vote. We spoke of access to the media for opposition, fair access to the opposition to the news and current affairs programs of all state-owned, state-operated, or state-controlled media in particular, and the media in general. We spoke about campaign finance reform to ensure that at the very least, their declarations of campaign contributions and election campaign spending by any political party of no more than 30 EC dollars per registered voter per election. Now, with respect to these, we are hearing suggestions of millions of dollars or more if the commission so decides. And we're not sure what the basis for these numbers are, but we're hearing too that there is going to be stipulated in law a campaign period, which I'm hearing may well be the period after which, the period between the time the Prime Minister announces the election and polling day, which is a period of about 3 to 4 weeks at best, by way of settled practice in Dominica. Now, if you're going to authorize in law spending of $5 or $10 million during that period, and that period only, without any regard to what happened before, this is a proposal out of the sky, out of somebody's hat, that really means nothing in the real circumstances of Dominica. Because let us recall, the leader of the Dominica Labour Party telling a large crowd at a rally in St. Joseph in 2014 that the booking of Donnie McClurkin to perform at a free pre-election concert on the 28th of November 2014 was made since June of 2014. He said it showed the level of thought and planning that had gone into the election campaign. And we all understood the Prime Minister's statement to mean that months before he discharged his exclusive constitutional responsibility to announce the date for general elections in 2014, he had contracted international artists at significant cost for free entertainment treating as part of the DLP 2014 election campaign. What we're dealing with here now is the reality that outside of that limited campaign period, the bulk of the money used in a campaign, like let's say for the ruling party, will be collected and spent, but will not be reported on because it will be outside of the reporting period. In the reporting period, they can raise and spend 5 or 10 million. Outside of that, they can spend whatever they want. And we know elections in Dominica, the campaign is usually 6 to 12 months. If to the extent that that is a proposal coming forward, it needs to be looked at very carefully. And our proposal remains, we're willing to consider maybe even a higher figure per head, but it cannot be just a figure that drops from somebody's hat. We're saying $30 per person for political party, per voter for political parties around the country is more than enough for our election campaign to put the plans and programs of the party forward. On the question of access to media, just provide the access in law in very simple terms. that does not get involved in what I consider to be state-sponsored censorship of what the opposition will want to present on the radio stations under the guise that, oh, it might be slandering or libeling somebody. The ruling party has had absolutely no such concerns, as the state radio has been used as a weapon, a propaganda weapon against the opposition in these election campaigns, and it's time to bring an end to this. The circumstances in which the consultant accepted the responsibility for providing, for coming up with recommendations on electoral reform, and the extensive knowledge and experience of the consultant in legal affairs in the Caribbean and around the globe should put that individual in a position to be knowledgeable about best practices in these matters: campaign finance regulations, access to media, and so on, so that we don't have to get into these into any airy-fairy kind of provisions right now. We can be specific with the best practices that are available in the region and around the world, so that our legislation can be patterned on that. There is a huge problem with all of the arrangements surrounding the confirmation of voters on the register. And it has come about because of this manipulation of the electoral process to use overseas voters and to pay these huge sums of money to bribe them and bring them into Dominica to vote to determine the results of the elections. No provisions have been made for that I'm aware of or I have heard of. Dr. Andre was going into some things that he has become aware of. And it would be good if at this stage, the consultants recognize the enormity of the problem where this corruption of the process through the purchase, the bribery of overseas voters to come and vote impacts the problem. And to be clear in the law that the transportation of voters, the payment of transportation expenses for voters, on the condition expressed or implied that that particular voter will vote for a particular candidate or party in the election, is bribery. The law needs to be clear on that, because the absence of that clarity has led to manipulation of the law that is part of the process over the years to the benefit of those who would like to abuse the process for the gain of consistently coming away as the victors in elections in Dominica. I'll leave it there for now, Sheridan.
Yes. Yeah, Lennox, thanks a lot. Before I go back to Dr. Andre, I will want to go over to Lambi to give the numbers out to give our listeners an opportunity to call. But when I do come back to you, Dr. Andre, I mean, I really want us to put some weight on this part of the discussion, because that is where the rubber meets the road. Because clearly, from all that we've heard tonight, from all that we feared, from since that famous email was circulated, there is no intention to have free and fair election, because it is going to affect somebody's election winning legacy. That is the
election legacy.
Re-election. That is a fundamental thing behind all of this. And that is why the electoral commission has been reconstituted in terms of its membership, with the sole purpose of preventing that. That is how I interpret it. And when I look at some of the recommendations that are coming out here, for somebody who's getting paid so much money, I'm wondering, what is this all about? Because everything there seems to be now worse than it was before. Because whether you talk about the residency thing, somebody seems to be still trying to cloud it. I mean, Dr. Andre was so clear. You reside where you reside, your place of abode. So if you live in Marigot and you go to Rose for a few days, you go back home to Marigot, you reside in Marigot. If you reside in New York, you come to Dominica, you go back home to New York. It's so clear. Yet that seems to be up in the air a little bit. The whole question of the cleaning of the list, I'm not so sure why it cannot be clear that all the registration should be done in Dominica. And that takes care of that. In terms of the campaign finance, to me, that is throwing so much mud under the thing and it's making that worse than it was. And then, of course, the question of enforcing the law. No matter what laws, the fact of the matter is there are laws on the books now that were not enforced for how many election cycles. What makes us think that this particular electoral commission, which is designed to prevent these people from the re-election winning legacy, what makes us think that they will enforce any of the laws that Dr. Andrew was describing? They will not. We know what happened to the IPO and they try to enforce the law. So we cannot go and fool ourselves about that. The whole question of what is access to media or anything, even the campaign period. I mean, come on. It is preposterous for anybody to tell me that you're going to say, yes, it's okay for you to spend $50 million before the campaign period. But once the election date is given, and we know generally they give you 3 or 4 weeks, then they say you should spend your $5 million in there. And if you need to spend more, then you have to get permission, right? But the point is, it's saying absolutely enough about the 50, 60, 70 million you can spend before that, and you haven't got to account for it. Why is it only in that window that you're going to account? Why do you need to account for what you spend after the election? There's no need for that. It's what you spend before the election for the campaign. So from everything that I'm seeing, and even down to this question, Lennox, of the digital. I mean, hearing talk about people want people to vote digital. I'm hearing people saying in this modern age, we should be able to find a way for people to vote digitally from overseas. And so on. To me, that is a no, that should be thrown out the window. That should not even be discussed at this time. Dominica is not ready for that. If you have I mean, I don't know. I mean, you have these numbers better than me, Lennox. If you have 20,000 economic citizens out there, are they all going to vote digitally?
No, we have 23,794 for a 4-year period, 2016 to 2020.
Well,
so our economic citizen register could be up to beyond 40,000 people.
Well, that's the point. So, I mean, why? Let's not throw that out the window. To me, I find common sense that let's leave that out. Don't even think about it. So let's go over to Lambi and Dr. Andre. I hope you can help us to clarify some of that, both you and Lennox, when we come back. Lambi?
Yes, good evening, listening and viewing the Global View and Q. The numbers to contact us are as follow. The local numbers 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257. The overseas or international number 305-432-9624. Let me run those numbers one more time. Local numbers 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257. The international number 305-432-9624, and we already have a local call here. Stand by. Good evening, caller. Please go ahead.
Justice Andre Rizak.
Thanks a lot, Lambi. Dr. Andre, I want to go back to you first, and then I'll go back to Lennox. We're going to open the discussion now. We're not doing interviews. We're discussing now. We're really discussing. I think we come down to the nitty-gritty. Lambi, you want to take a call before we move on?
On the overseas line, please go ahead.
Greetings, gentlemen.
Hello.
Greetings.
How are you?
Well, I'm listening. I don't know why you guys would expect Byron to do anything that would obstruct the man who pays him, or that would not favor the man the rogue who paid him. First of all, Byron should know that the one-man rogue regime, who was the office of Prime Minister, is not the one who's supposed to hire him. And in as much as Byron accepted that, he has already done the wrong thing. So why would you guys think that Byron would do anything to favor the country or the people, rather than himself and the one who paid him? Byron, I have concluded, gentlemen, all due respect to you guys, I have concluded that all black people in authority are rogues.
Thank
Die.
you,
Thank you.
Colin. You want to take any calls, Lambi, or should I go ahead? Okay. Well, let's go over to Dr. Andre. I mean, Dr. Andre, you've heard one of the callers already. I expect we'll get more calls with more sentiments. I mean, all ideas content. But certainly, I don't know what the Lennox store is.
They called, I didn't hear the caller correct. Did he say all black people who are in office are rogues? Is that what he said, Lambi?
I didn't hear all of it to tell you myself either.
Well, I just want to totally disassociate myself from those comments.
Right, because
it is totally unacceptable that somebody could actually call a program with 4 black people, eminent black people who I'm not aware that he knows anything about us that suggests we are less than honorable people. And to suggest that everybody who is in office or who is in a public position as a black person is a rogue is totally unacceptable. And I condemn it completely.
Yeah, let's all agree. Let's all agree that yeah, Lennox, your mic is open.
Okay, let me take it off.
Right, because let's all agree that that statement is, out of place. But Dr. Andre, I mean, when you look at Lambi, you want to take a call again? Is that okay? We can go. And Dr. Andre, when we look at the preponderance of evidence in all of those specific, the main issues, in other words, the framework of this whole question of our democracy, what it is that you really need to have free and fair election, the residency requirement for that to be clear. And listen to me. We know that we've had so many programs on this, and we know this thing is not rocket science. All these things exist in most of the countries around us in the Caribbean. We know that we've been advised by OAS and all kind of people about it. There is really not a problem. That is why I said after receiving all this, I was hoping that whatever was coming out of the second report would be a little different. But it seems to me it has got worse. And I really want to get your feedback on that, Dr. Andrew.
Well, has it really gotten worse? But has what is being produced the logical result of what was paid for? Have we gotten the professional objective perspective of Sir Byron? Or have what we gotten merely a compromise to pay the piper or to give the piper what he's paid for? That is the question. The fact of the matter is, I know one of your callers said he doesn't know why we expect anything different, but there's such a thing as your integrity as a professional, your integrity as a judicial officer, although you're now retired and hopefully enjoying your retirement, your corporate retirement, as Vic Revere used to say donkey years ago. That has to account for something. You must be able to defend your position on the basis of the best practices in terms of electoral reform. You must be able to say, well, look, here is my professional opinion regarding this issue. And it is based on my integrity and my learning and my professionalism and so on. You must be able to say that, for God's sakes. If you can't say that, then it raises the question, well, why did you accept the assignment? If you cannot give a report which reflects your learning, your experience, your expertise. Now, I'm not sure he has any expertise in this field. I'm not necessarily convinced. But again, access to information about the best practices of electoral reform is available to anyone on the internet. It's available to anyone. The Concerned Citizens of Dominica, I think they produced a report headed by Pastor Rodney. They could have been paid $200,000, to be quite frank with you. So if you are not giving your best in terms of the best practices, then how can you justify doing any type of report? A report which has more holes than a strainer. For God's sakes. You can actually have bakes passing through that strainer based on the report you've prepared. So it raises the question, why do it if it does not reflect your objective perspectives on what true electoral reform really is. Don't we deserve better? Why are you proposing something which you will not propose in another West Indian island in terms of best practices? Perhaps because you haven't been asked. Why have you not written articles indicating that this is the way West Indian governments should be proceeding in terms of electoral reform? Because you would have faced a deluge of criticism, an avalanche of opposition. So why saddle that on Dominica? Now, one of your callers, Lambi, keeps shutting him down. But before Lambi shut him down this time, I heard what he said, and it's a love song he was singing to me. And he was singing, "I don't know how I love Dr. Andre." And I'll say to him, I love it that you love me so much that every time I come to the show on the program, you have to try to call. So thank you. Your love is much appreciated, Gaston. Continue in that vein, sweetheart of mine. But you understand the point. We deserve better than this. We deserve something that we can sit back and say, look, this reflects our progress as an independent nation of some 45 years old. We can accept that and we can apply our own learning and intelligence and say, yes, this is the appropriate slate of reforms being proposed. Not something that we have to look through critically and identify all kinds of holes that every Tutulu crab will be proud of. We deserve better.
Now, Dr. Andre, we certainly deserve better. You see, here's my issue, Lennox. When I look at all of this, right, I mean, we know the most important thing in terms of that whole winning legacy business there is the bribery and treating to bring people in. Let me, you want to take a call before we go?
Yes. Caller, please go ahead. The caller on the international line, please make your call.
Looks like you lost the call, so let's go. Lennox, I really wanted to make this point because listen, last time we saw, I mean, you know, how many, what, maybe 10, 12 big aircrafts on the airport, they're bringing people in and out. But, you know, really and truly, the same thing can happen right here in the region with the ferries, you know. A lot of people can come in from right around here without bringing people from all the way in America. So, I mean, to me, that whole question of that residency thing is important. It's very, very important because that is the only way you're going to put a stop to this. But then again, I'm still concerned about all of the other aspects of the thing. You're having all these negatives because my concern is that who is going to enforce the law? Lamb, you want to take a call before we go?
Yes. Caller, please go ahead. Caller, are you listening? The caller is there, but the caller.
All right. So maybe you're the. So, all right. So the call is not ready. Lennox, let us look at this. And Dr. Andrea, I'm hoping you can comment on this too, because to me, if the law is not going to be enforced, and we know the purpose of changing the people on the Electoral Commission is because somebody was not happy with the fact that the other two people who were there before was allowing these reforms to take place. The e-bill said you have to stop that madness. So we put two other people there. The madness stopped. And so how many years later, we're still trying to talk electoral reform. And then what we see now from a legal luminary are those recommendations that are being made, and none of them seem to be able to stand the test of scrutiny because they're not going to solve the problems. And the worst thing I see is that you're saying that is that same electoral commission which cannot take off a one dead person's name from a list is the one that has to decide whether or not you're going to allow somebody to hear something on DBS or something, whether you're going to put sanctions on somebody who does not account properly. To me, Lennox, your thoughts on that?
Okay. Let me say, Sheridan, that the corrupt manipulation of the overseas vote has been one of the principal deformities of the electoral process in Dominica through the last 4 election cycles. And if we're talking about reform that is in the public interest of free and fair elections, then that is one of the elements, that's one of the deformities that necessitate reform. So for example, and there are elements to this, the law as it stands right now provides that you can be registered as an elector in Dominica if you're Dominican over 18 years and you have lived in a particular, you live in a particular constituency, you can show residence in a particular constituency for 3 months and more, then you can be entered on the register. So you're entered on the register to vote in that constituency. You cannot be entered in a register to vote anywhere in Dominica. You entered on the register to vote in a particular constituency. That is the law, that is the process. You leave and you go overseas so that your place of ordinary residence is no longer Dominica. You're living overseas. The law provides that if your place of ordinary residence is not Dominica for a period of 5 years, then your name should be taken off the register until such time that you return to live in Dominica indefinitely, and then you will re-register through the process that is available in law. Simple thing. However, in the law, when it comes to removing the name from the register, the law talks about absence from Dominica as opposed to no longer being ordinarily resident in Dominica. And absence from Dominica has been construed to mean the 5-year clock stops running. The 5-year clock on your not resident in Dominica stops running if you come back for 2 days for the Creole Music Festival, or if you come for Carnival, or if you come for 2 days, 3 days of vacation, then the clock stops running and another 5-year clock starts. But you're living overseas. You're no longer ordinarily resident. So what was required now from these consultants who have electoral best practices available to them from across the globe was a clarification in law of what it means to be no longer ordinarily resident in Dominica, which would disqualify you from being on the register of voters until such time as you return to live indefinitely in Dominica. What did they do instead? They said, oh, okay, we're going to stick to this absence regime as opposed to going to the residence regime, which is what the law is hoisted on. They said, no, we're going to stick with this absence regime, and we're going to provide in the law that if you can show that you have come to Dominica for an aggregate of 90 days over the 1,825 days of the 5-year period, you will not be considered to be absent from Dominica, and therefore your name can stay on the register. That is absurd. And it is coming as a compromise so that the ruling party that has corruptly manipulated the overseas vote will have the numbers that they have relied on through the years to continue to do that. That's one piece. The other piece of it is the facilitation of these overseas voters to remain on the register, where the consultants are insisting on putting in the legislation a provision for enrollment centers, 4 or 5, they say, at certain locations in the globe. 4 locations where people can be reconfirmed on the register. Our position in the United Workers' Party is that that process is inherently discriminatory. It will not reach every single Dominican who is living overseas. And therefore, unless you can arrange for some online facility that is safe and secure where everybody, wherever they're living in the world community, can go and reconfirm themselves on the register, everybody should come home to be replaced on the register as you have required in the 6 to 9 month period following the enactment of the new legislation. But the way they're going about this forces you to consider that there is a concern in the back of the minds of the consultants about this re-election legacy of Roosevelt Skerrit. And they may well be driven in some of the proposals they're bringing forward, which makes no sense from an international best practice point of view, which now is the time for it, because they say they're modernizing, they're not reforming, they're modernizing. So if you're modernizing, let's bring on board the best practices. Let's bring on board the best of what the world has to offer, and let's benefit from that. No, you are concocting things that seem to be special to Dominica and special to this business, this agenda of non-interference with the re-election legacy of Roosevelt Skerry. Because we know in the last 4 election cycles just how this re-election has been manufactured. We know what has happened. We know the elements of it. And they are all contrary to election law and practice around the world. We don't elect governments through bribery. We don't elect governments through cheating. We don't elect governments through manipulation of the voters' lists, etc., etc. And we can go down the line. But we seem to be in compromise mode to maintain elements of that will allow the re-election legacy of Roosevelt Skerry to remain intact. And the people of Dominica have to be clear on that. What is it they're going to stand for? Because this process of election does not belong to Roosevelt Skerry, and it cannot be used indefinitely for his own personal gain. The people must decide, and they must decide that they're going to stand and they're going to say, we have had enough. No more compromises. Reform is reform. This is what we're changing. This is what is going to happen. And to do that before the government is taking any legislation to Parliament for changing the laws. And if the government is insisting on going to Parliament to change laws against the will of the people in terms of what they really want, then the people should go out in the streets and prevent it from happening. We have had enough of this.
Well, like I've said, Lennox, maybe you could turn your mic off 1 second. Like I said, that Dr. Andre, I do not see any commitment from the process that has taken place. I was hopeful they might have seen some kind of a commitment towards genuine electoral reform. I've not seen any of that now from what we're hearing from, particularly from this phase 2 report. It seems as if the phase 1 report gave somebody some jitters, and then maybe they got to somebody, hey, what's going on, partner? What you doing? Take care of that in the second report, because to me, I'm seeing things in that second report that we're talking about that I really absolutely did not expect at all. Now, if I was a legal luminary, Dr. Andre, and I was getting all this money there, and I didn't want to spend too much of it. So I don't want to go, as Lennox said, go all over the globe and looking for international best practice. I'm just looking at my home right there, maybe in St. Kitts or something I'm from, and see what best practice they have right there, or in Antigua, or in Jamaica. And they get right there, the laws are there, you know. And I have draftsmen drafting for me, tell them, partner, take the best practices from those places right around us there. At my home, I have it there. Charity begins at home. Take it from my home. Let's give it to them. This is my professional opinion as to what best practices are. They work in Jamaica, they work in St. Kitts, they work in Antigua. We're not seeing that. From what I heard you describe there tonight, yourself and Lennox, Dr. Andre, it's very concerning that all of the recommendations there seem to be bent on preserving somebody's legacy. Your thoughts?
Yes, that is the concern. That is the concerning part of these proposals. And bear in mind 2 things about St. Kitts. I can't remember, but who was it or which people in which island took upon themselves to prevent a plane or planes from landing in their island filled with passengers who were coming to vote in defiance of the laws of that island? Which one? Second, in which island was there a successful elections petition brought before the court within weeks of an election, and the court was able to render a decision in that application to the court, compared to the status in Dominica, where, for example, you have challenges, electoral challenges, are languishing in the system. not for days, not for weeks, not for months, but for years. Tell me why. Tell me why that is the case. Why should we have to go through that difficulty? The courts should not be serving one entity. The courts should be serving the public. That's what gives it legitimacy. You see, a lot of folks, including lawyers, like to
Well, let me
thunder
ask
about.
you. Let me ask you, Dr. Andre.
Right.
Isn't that a matter that should have concerned the consultants, especially since the sole commissioner is himself what is regarded as a legal luminary. This matter of delay in the courts with the handling of election petitions, when the time provided in law for an election petition to be filed is specific at 21 to 28 days, depending on whether there is some element of bribery that has been alleged. And the courts have said, the leaders of court in the OECS have said at the level of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court that it is important for the people to know as soon as possible after an election who their validly elected representatives are. So this business of taking years to determine an election petition being itself part of the electoral process. I remember us having discussions on that matter with the consultant when we met him, and you would think that is something that the consultant would want to propose in the very same House of Assembly Elections Act, which is the Phase 2 report, where he's making recommendations for changes to that. And the House of Assembly Elections Act is what provides for election petitions. Shouldn't that delay be dealt with by way of indicating, well, these matters need to be concluded within 6 months, for example,
Again,
at first instance.
well, there's no question that that is something that should be. It shouldn't even have to be stated, for God's sakes. I mean, the court has an obligation, but bear in mind one thing, because we can't just blame the court. Bear in mind the pressures that are being brought to bear on judicial officers in jurisdictions in the Caribbean, the Eastern Caribbean. Bear in mind the experience of Sue Bryan. Bear in mind the experience, I believe, of Justice Redhead some time ago, a few years ago. Bear in mind the experience of another jurist whose name escapes me. Bear in mind Angelo Allen speaking very eloquently about that problem. What message do you think? Bear in mind, in some island, a judge who had retired, he was ordered to pay or expected to pay customs duties. I can't remember his name, Gaston. He had to seek a judicial review of that decision, and he got a decision within weeks. Bear in mind the pressures on judicial officers to toe the line.
Are you also suggesting there may be pressures on former judicial officers to toe the line as?
Oh, of course, because it sends a message to those who are still on the bench. Even when you retire for some reason or the other, not because you've done anything wrong, but for some minor incident that may be considered to be spiteful or disrespectful, we take you through the ringers. We impose burdens on you so that those coming after you will get the message. Don't mess with us. You must toe the line. And those pressures are even greater on magistrates. Certainly those in Dominica. I don't know all of them. I know many of them. And many of them are good people, conscientious. But the pressures of conformity hangs over their neck like a sword, an execution sword. If you don't toe the line, your contract. Isn't there a magistrate in Dominica? I think his name was Ozzy Lewis. The ostensible reason for not renewing his contract was because he's too old. Here's a man even today making an exceptionally sterling contribution to Dominica's sporting history by hosting this popular program. not just on cricket, but on other sports, with generous contributions from people like Ron Lander and Sebastian, with Lobby being the 12th man on the program. And instead of using a man such as this in full possession of his faculties, to perhaps be an inspiration for younger folks, to perhaps be a griot in terms of assisting them and guiding them, he's dumped on the wayside. What message do you think is being sent when a magistrate is told, if you don't make a decision in the way that we contemplate you make that decision, we will simply bring in some Trinidadian fella from Maraipa or wherever, I don't know, San Fernando, to take your job? You see? So we have to bear these factors in mind when we speak critically of the judicial system. It's not that the justices themselves, in and of themselves, are bad folk. Many of them are very good professionals, but it's because of the invisible hand of political manipulation that is shaped in a way that approaches inexorably their necks. That's the problem that we face in the Eastern Caribbean, certainly in Dominica.
Haven't you made a case for the invisible hand of political manipulation or interference in this particular reform assignment?
Of course. Of course. And the thing is, it seems to me, and that's just my personal opinion, that judicial officers have to show that they are above any accusation of being tainted, of being interfered with in the exercise of their tremendous powers. They have to stand on their own feet, literally. They have to be beyond reproach. They have to deal with cases where no one can issue any type of legitimate criticism, that they owe a debt to one of the lawyers in the case before them. They should have the authority and the integrity to recuse themselves, to avoid any appearance, any semblance of partiality. They must have the courage to do precisely that. Because if they don't, they become the biggest authors of the fall of the court in terms of its reputation. Not those folks who are criticizing the court, but those folk, the decision makers, who do not govern themselves by these exalted principles of judicial impartiality and judicial independence. And I will not go into details, but there have been decisions made which, quite frankly, raise the specter of judicial independence, of judicial interference, and the lack of judicial impartiality. And that is something that the court should guard itself against, because that is the biggest threat to the court, one of the biggest threats to the court as we know it today. But again, I say, in fairness to them, they are under tremendous pressure to make decisions in a certain fashion. Read some of the decisions of Sir Brian Alleyne in Grenada. Read some of the comments made against him by the political directorate at that time. And I try to chronicle some of that sad, unfortunate history in a book I wrote about judges. And I'm not promoting anything I wrote, but I'm just pointing it out to say that this is an inconvenient truth that exists in the Eastern Caribbean. It's not only in the Eastern Caribbean that you have those issues, you have it all over the place. But certain jurisdictions take that degree of interference more seriously than others. And that is the problem.
Yeah, but Lennox, I want to let's go back and take a closer look at this thing here now. Because you see, what is disturbing me is this. if there is a commitment to the reforms, it seems to me that there has to be some serious sanctions outlined in the recommendations. Because if, for example, you say you have the campaign window, right? Campaign period, and you say you're not supposed to spend more than so and so, but you leave it open that you can spend millions before. But even if you were to breach that, the law in that campaign period, what is the sanction that the Electoral Commission would impose on you? I have not seen any way that is clearly defined.
Well, hopefully it will. It will provide hefty penalties for breaching the spending limits that are imposed by law. And those spending limits that are imposed cannot be just coming out from a hat with no consideration as to realities in Dominica. You cannot be just plucking 10, $15 million from a hat and saying that's your campaign spending for the 3-week period immediately before the election. And then you could maybe spend $40, $50 million of passport money before that if you're the ruling party in Dominica. The problem with all of that is that, notwithstanding the fact that we've seen elections openly purchased in Dominica, and the evidence is clear of that, the consultants must have enough before them to know that that is a significant problem. It does not appear that they are dealing with it in a manner that is not constrained by concerns for the re-election legacy of Roosevelt Skerrit and the Dominican Labour Party. And you know, I made the point earlier, Sheridan, that the people of Dominica need to wake up, get involved, and rescue their democracy, rescue free and fair elections from capture by Roosevelt Skerrit and his gang. Because when your electoral process is hijacked and it can deliver results only for one set of people, those people are the ones who will rape and plunder your resources of immunity, and they will leave you cranana, as they're doing right now. They can come and tell you, listen, we have an economy that is working, but it's not working for you, the people of Dominica. It's working for outsiders who we are employing to work while you are sitting down idle. And those employed from the outside are sending away from your country, from your passport money, over $200 million a year to their economies for the benefit of their economies. They can tell you that, knowing that you're suffering, knowing you have no job, knowing you're underemployed. And there is nothing that can be done about that. In the normal country, that is enough to have a government voted out of office. But the government is only going to be voted out of office if the people have control of their election machinery, where it has been captured by those who are sending out the $200 million. Then nothing happens. Where it is captured by those who have $4.2 billion of the state's money sitting unlawfully and unconstitutionally outside of Dominica, and they're doing as they please with it. Enough for any person guilty of that kind of practice to be voted out of office. They will remain there because the process allows for that. The capture of the process allows them to do that. And they who have captured the process are not going to release it from captivity just like that. They're going to fight to hold on to it as they're fighting to hold on to it right now. It is the people who must decide. We are intervening now. You can no longer do what you want with our process. You can no longer take from us the right and responsibility to elect a government of the people, by the people, for the people, with our majority votes of conscience. That's for us, not for you to decide. We must decide who government is, we the people. And that right has been taken away from the people. It is not going to be given back to them just like that. They have to take it back. So when we consider these, the reason that somebody like myself was willing to see where the consultancy went, notwithstanding all of the important recommendations on reform that were before the commission and the people of Dominica, that the government frustrated and refused to allow happen. I was one of those willing to see where we reached or where we would go with this Byron consultancy. Because at some point in time, professionals with integrity rise above the political fray and deliver solutions in the public interest, which is what we thought, which is what I honestly thought was going to come from the Byron consultation. I am concerned at this stage in the game that there's an overriding concern with protecting the re-election legacy of Roosevelt Skerrit that is influencing some of these recommendations we're seeing coming out of the consultative exercise. And it is worrying, to say the least, because it means that more than ever, the people are now going to have to get involved in massive protest action across Dominica to ensure that they get what they want, not what Roosevelt Skerrit wants.
Now, what is a little puzzle? I mean, if you could turn your mic off a minute. What is a little puzzling is that I swear I heard Mr. Skerrit say that some time ago when he was on a platform that it was going to be his last appearance on a campaign platform as a candidate. He would not be contesting again. Now, and I'm at a little bit at a loss as to what is all this thing about, the re-election legacy, when in fact, if the gentleman said that he's not planning to run again, right? He's removed from himself the finance ministry and he given somebody else and he said, I'm not running again. I am still finding there's a curious interest because why? Because it seems to me that with this whole question of electoral reform, all of the political parties have an equal interest because it means that you're in opposition today in government tomorrow. The Labour Party could be in opposition tomorrow. It should want an even playing field, all right? Even playing field, so you'll have the best chance of winning, just like anybody else. But I get a distinct feeling that the way the Labour Party is behaving is that they don't expect to be out of office at all. And so it's okay if we have all this thing happening here because that is only going to keep us in there. But if he's saying he's going, who is he trying to keep in there?
No, but he says he's going, but he's going where? There's some intelligence on the ground that he's going to the presidency. That's where he's headed. He needs the Labour Party in office for him to be comfortable in the presidency. So the re-election legacy has to continue. I mean, you mentioned the ridding himself of the finance portfolio and so on. All of that is consistent with where he seems to be heading, because not having the finance ministry as of December last year means when we come to budget in July, he's not going to be the one presenting the budget, and the period for the consultation between the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition for the new president, because Mr. Sabre must demit office on the 1st of October, which means on the 2nd of October we'll have a new president in place. But the period in the Constitution for the consultation between the leader of the opposition and the Prime Minister to consult opens up on the 1st of July. It means that the Prime Minister, if he intends to go into the presidency or consider for the presidency, cannot be the Prime Minister at the time that the consultation period opens up. So there's talk that he was leaving in June, and his leaving in June is consistent with all of that. That once the period of consultation opens up, somebody else will be in the Prime Minister's position, consulting with the leader of the opposition on him and whoever else they would like to consider for president. There's all of that in the works, but to make the point that, yes, he's moving on, but the moving on for now is to the presidency, which requires his re-election legacy to remain intact.
Dr. Andre, all good things have to come to an end. We've been here talking. This is not the first program that we've had on electoral reform. And I was very hopeful myself that we could have had genuine electoral reform because it seems so easy because it already exists in the islands around us. And they've done it successfully in very short period of time. I think Antigua was a period of 3 months or something like that. They got theirs done, 3-4 months. I'm not so sure how long Jamaica took to do theirs or send kits, but certainly Antigua did theirs fairly easily. I'm just wondering why it is taking us so many years, and then why does it mean that to do reform, somebody has to say, no, you cannot do reform, it will mess up your re-election legacy. I mean, once that happens, and that is an advisor of the prime minister. And then what happens immediately after that? Members of the commission change. And then the commission cannot even get money to get ID cards or something like that they want you to get cards. To me, it seems to me that somebody decided to put a spoke in a wheel. And for years now, we're still talking. And then as we're talking about it now, and we were hopeful that we might see some light at the end of this tunnel here, it seems to me we're seeing more obstacles in the way when we talk about the residency thing and the whole question of cleaning list and the whole question of campaign finance and even the campaign period, the window in which you can spend money after you account for it. And people are still hinting that they want people to vote from overseas. I heard the Prime Minister say his own voice at a press conference, I believe, that in this modern day and age, 2023, people should be able to vote from anywhere. And what is that? Is that what is happening? No, and my big concern, as I said, Lennox, is the question of enforcement. And that is the problem that we've had. You see, the problem we've had is that the law is not being enforced. That is why we were having a problem, if all the people coming in and being just bringing in people and vote and hear attorneys saying, well, listen, so if you give somebody a VEP from Maho to Roseau, it's a problem. So if a person a VEP from New York to Dominica is a problem, that's not a problem as far as the attorney concerned. I don't know what they told the CCJ when they went up there on these matters, because I heard the CCJ say, listen, this thing is tainted, put a stop to it. But nobody taking the CCJ on. As a matter of fact, they tell the CCJ, okay, you tell us to go back to the court with this matter. But we're nolly processing that. No law, no constitution. So, Dr. Andre, this is part of the problem I have. I have a little confusion there with who's going to enforce the law.
Well, the cruel irony is the Constitution made provision for the holding of a referendum to substitute the Privy Council for the CCJ, if I recall correctly. But at least in terms of our last court. And it was they who decided that referendum be damned. The Privy Council was a vestige of our colonial past. We are now independent. There should be a regional court of last resort. These are the folks, who advocated for the switch from the Privy Council to the CCJ. And when the CCJ makes a decision based on the rule of law, look at how they reacted, like spoiled children. Growing up and you're playing big batsman and they bowl you for naught. You decide to take your bat and ball and go. That is the reaction of these folk. You see? That is their reaction. So they are shopping. They are shopping for the right judge, the right decision. The Attorney General even wrote to the CCJ saying, Gasson, why don't you explain yourself? Can you imagine that? So in terms of those norms that we adhere to, recognizing the separation of the judiciary from the political arm of the state, in terms of judicial independence, these things are out the window. That's the problem. You see, what is happening is a persistent shopping, either for an expert to write the right type of report in terms of electoral reform, to appoint the right type of person to the IPO, to appoint the right type of leader of the Electoral Commission, to appoint the right type of person to head the aid bank or other institutions, to bypass persons who've served with honesty and integrity for years or decades. That is the pattern that, unfortunately, which has been exhibited throughout the tenure of the administration. And that is why you have so much discontent, because persons are not being rewarded for their hard work, their honesty, their integrity. And if you have that state of affairs, then you are on a slippery slope to oblivion. And again, the question is simple. Doesn't Dominica deserve better? All islands are striving to achieve their best, to give their brightest an opportunity to excel. Look at how they've treated the dice. Before the competition, you have the heads of the political directorate saying he should fire Patiron, the best, the greatest calypso writer in Dominica's history. Dice, with his overflow of natural talent, you just name it. And every year there's a campaign to ensure that he is not the winning the crown. And you have some political appointees on the committee making the decision, and then you ask, why did he not make the grade? Because there's a concerted attempt to ensure that he doesn't. And that's what's happening. If you are perceived, note the word please, if you are perceived not to be singing the songs of praise from the same hymn book, then mysteriously things happen to you. Roadblocks are put in your way. And that's why, as I said, we have to be somewhat circumspect in terms of persons who fear coming out, because the sword of retribution swings with a deadly edge. But bear in mind one thing, and that's where the hope lies. The more persons speak out, the more others will be encouraged to do the same. And once people understand and realize the strength within them, quite frankly, all those concerns will wash away, and a proud people will stand to save its democracy, to save its livelihood, and to save its children. And that is where we should be, hopefully, at some point in our future. Hopefully sooner than later.
But Lennox, I'm going to give you a chance to make your final remarks. But before you do that, I wanted to put this thing back in there again, because clearly what we're struggling with there, the other islands around have done it. And you can see the elections are much more smooth. Antigua, you see what happened in Antigua there? 6 votes. This, and you see what happened in St. Lucia, what happened in St. Vincent, what happened in Grenada. So it seems to me that something is standing in the way. Now, unless the people of Dominica, who are the only ones who can save themselves, unless they can understand that really their situation is a direct response to poor governance. Because if you have poor governance, you're going to have a poor economy. If you have a poor economy, it obviously is going to impact people's jobs and livelihoods and so on. It'll impact the farmers, it will impact the public servants. As we can see that they're not getting any increases over the years. The farmers are wondering what is happening to markets, what's happening to funding. They cannot take money. Farmers used to go and pay cash for their vehicle and their house. Now they have to go and they can't take a loan at a bank. So it seems to me that unless the people, and if the people really understand that what is standing in the way of their progress is the fact that they do not have an enabling policy environment. Because there it is, we're talking about, we're selling endless passports. You know the numbers better than me. It's possible we have sold 40,000, I don't know. But the point is we sold endless, and endless money came. So we build roads and we fix things and health centers. But Dominicans not working there. And then we are in, yes, it's true, Dominicans not working, so the foreigners get the jobs and they send the money out, $214 million of the money. But what if that money, half of that was staying in there, and it could go through like cash registers by Suki and by Nasif and by Astafan and by Egbert Charles and so on? Wouldn't that have made things a little better in the economy? Some people might have been able to get another little job and so on. But instead of that,
Not a little better, Sheridan, a whole lot better.
well, this is the point. And all this money, if you spend $200 million in Dominica, there's a lot of VAT.
The wage bill, the annual wage bill of the public service is in the region of $150 million, So all the teachers, the nurses, the fire officers, the customs workers, all of the public officers serving the state of Dominica, the amount of money spent on them is in the region of $150 million a year. And the prime minister can get up and boast that he has foreign employees in Dominica taking out of the country every year over $200 million from the employment income in Dominica. So you see the extent to which we're suffering, but a party like that in government is kicked out of office anywhere else in the world. But where the party in government is in control of the election machinery, where it has rigged it to serve its purpose, the change doesn't come. It doesn't happen. And that is where the people of Dominica now need to get involved, because they have to say, listen, we're taking our electoral process back from you. You cannot decide for us indefinitely who our government is going to be. You've had enough. It's enough. Can you imagine that?
Let me ask you this. Do you think that this might be the reason why so much effort is being made to continue to have the ability to bring people in to vote without being sanctioned? Because it seems to me that what is causing the winning the re-election legacy to be able to perpetuate itself? Is that because it seems to me everything that I'm hearing there on all these new things is preserving that one thing.
Yeah, the re-election legacy has been successfully hoisted on the corruption of the corrupt manipulation of the overseas vote in the last 3-4 election cycles, more than anything else. And what we have to look ahead for is the continued manipulation of that overseas vote through the bringing on board of economic citizens to vote going forward. We have to be very careful with that, because they're Dominicans, and the law allows them to vote if they can. The existing law allows them to vote if they can show residency in a particular constituency for 3 months. And it is not difficult to do that in this environment, where they can stay where they are, in the very same way as they pay $100,000 for the passport, pay some money to rent a place that is in their name for 3 months, and pay electricity bills in their name, and so on and so on, and then get registered get on the register, and keep that government there indefinitely on the backs of people, unless the people decide we have had enough of it and no more. Sheridan, how do you explain a government that 23 years ago came to office and met all plans in place for the construction of an international airport? When I say all plans, I mean the master plan, the site development plan, the geotechnical studies, the economic feasibility studies, the environmental impact assessment studies, etc., all prepared and sitting there on the table November 1998. November 1998. All plans completed. You come into government in 2000, and it is 23 years later. You're talking about an international airport for which you have no geotechnical studies, you have no soil surveys. So you don't know what you're going to build, what you can build on the soil that you have selected. But you know the airport is going to cost you 6 months ago $1 billion, and then now $1.3 billion, which means it's $300 million more now for the airport. But you have no drawings and you have no designs for what you're going to build, but you know how much what you're going to build is going to cost you. This can only happen in Dominica. And anywhere else in the world that a group of people in government comes to the people with foolishness like that, they get kicked out of office. In Dominica, they remain because they have control of the process that they have rigged to secure themselves in office. And it is the people who must take that away from them.
So here's what I'm saying, Lennox. I think it's important for the people to make the connection. So I think there has to be a lot of education and information so people understand what is causing their particular situation that they're currently experiencing. I mean, it's not a nice situation. And the records show and the data shows that many people in a very impoverished situation in Dominica. Some people are in a state of mendicancy. It's clear the economy is not doing great. I mean, there's no real GDP growth. You have some infrastructure, have some capital projects, but then all that money is going out. People are not getting a job. They're not earning.
Do you think, Sheridan, there's a need to explain to people in Dominica that they're suffering?
I don't know. They can feel it, but what is it that is making them say it's okay? I can take the liquor suffering for the next 10 years. What do you think is making them say that?
But in the interest of what? You can take the suffering for the next 10 years in the interest of what? What do you expect after the suffering of the next 10 years? What do they see?
Well, what I see that's been offered to them is some brown paper bags with some groceries now and then, and also the possibility of getting an apartment unit, which you may not ever own because you're not sure if you'll ever own it.
The apartment unit with faulty sewage and leaks and cracks in the walls and so structural issues.
But these are the things that I've seen. Maybe there's a lot more going on that people are getting that I'm not seeing, but these are the only things that I've seen. So, Lennox, as we wind up, I mean, let's look at this thing truthfully. I don't see that electoral reform is going to be handed on a platter to anybody, not from what I've seen from all of these recommendations coming through.
Absolutely not.
I think there's going to be you see, in spite of what people are saying, oh, I want to get this thing over and done with. Let's do it and finish. I can't wait for this report. Give us this report, no matter what you have. Let's go with it. I'll go to the parliament and do it. In spite of that, I don't see really the things that are coming out indicate that anybody really wants any reforms. They really want things to remain exactly as they are. Absolutely no sanctions, and nobody going to put any sanction on anybody. Everybody just do whatever they want. People will continue coming and come in and vote and go about the merry way the day after. I don't see anything changing, frankly, unless, as you said, I've been saying so for a while, but I've put it in a different way. I've said, should Dominicans gather in massive numbers and peacefully demand what is rightfully theirs? I've been saying that for a while, Dr. Andre. I've been saying that on every single program we've had. I've been saying that. Lennox, I'm happy to hear you say it a little bit more stronger to me. You know, my English is not as good as yours. So it put a little bit more strongly than I put it in terms of people coming out. I do not, if the people of Dominica want electoral reform, whether they're in Dominica or overseas, if they want electoral reform, then they should come out and demand electoral reform. I do not think there's any other way that they will get it. Your final thoughts, Lennox?
Well, my final thoughts is that it is from the people that the electoral reform process has been hijacked by this administration. And those who have hijacked it from the people are not going to give it back to the people, no matter who they hire or who they engage, because the evidence is clear before us now that those that they have hired appear to be operating with an abundance of concern about the re-election legacy of the head of the party that has brought them into this party, into this electoral reform party. So the people have to accept responsibility for their electoral process, for rescuing it, and for ensuring that it is fixed going forward, regardless of what Roosevelt Skerrit thinks. And Roosevelt Skerrit must hear from the people in no uncertain terms about what they want to see as part of this electoral reform agenda. It cannot be that he's going to be left on his own to pick and choose and to set aside what he wants from the reform exercise and to go to Parliament with laws that are intended not to fix or change anything, but to dress it up in his image and likeness, for there to be limited or no interference with his re-election legacy going forward. That is not in the interest of Dominica. That's not how we reset the country. That's not how we bring the country to right order. And it is clear now that that is not his responsibility. His responsibility is to continue to exercise control over the billions of dollars that are sitting in foreign countries from the sale of our passports, that he can do what he pleases with under his affiliation with other non-Dominicans. He can tell them he's going to build an airport, and he can continue to spend money with no commitment or certainty that we're going to get any airport, but money is going to be spent. He can continue to employ foreigners and send all the employment income, 200 million of it overseas. He can continue to ignore the agriculture growth engine and the manufacturing growth engine, and continue to starve them of money while he can continue to keep the debt at over 100% of GDP while we have enough money out there to pay down the debt and to put the economy on a sound footing where people are earning decent incomes and really taking care of themselves and their families in a better way than they are doing right now. But none of that is going to happen if the government doesn't change, and the government is really not going to change if the government can itself, if this ruling party can decide who is in government. So there's a dark cloud which is hanging over the country that everybody sees and everybody knows, in the words of the song of Mr. Patty Aaron and the great Denison King Knight.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that,
That
Len.
cloud hanging over the country, everybody sees, everybody knows. Our silence speaks loud in complicity. Everybody sees, everybody knows. Preachers of the gospel are singing the devil's song. Irving Andre will conclude that. Thank you very much, Sheridan.
No problem.
Irving, God bless you. Lambi, God bless you.
Yeah, but
Again.
hang on with us there still, Lennox. Like you're wrong, hang in there still. But Dr. Andre, you know, to think that someone would be saying, listen, I'm getting out of here. That's my last appearance on a campaign platform. I am running again. And the thing you would go to that extent to try to ensure that the electoral system remains the same in order to secure the winning legacy. I don't have the information that Lennox has, so I cannot say for sure that I know without any doubt that this man really is planning to become the president. I suppose when June comes, we'll see. You know what they say, Master Little Lab, other things in time will tell. So we go see. But the point is, Dr. Andre, to go to that extent to prevent free and fair election just to maintain a winning legacy, if you want to become president, I mean, can the people of Dominica, don't they have an opinion about things like that? Do they feel any way that this is not happening in any other country in the Caribbean? Only in Dominica. Why is it that we must be so different?
That's a great question, and great minds or greater minds will try to ascertain the response or the answer to that question. But let me differ in respect to one thing you've said. You've said that the resistance to free and fair elections is to preserve the winning legacy. It's much more than that. It's to preserve the pocket. It's to preserve the largesse that has been transformed into huge buildings, like, what do they call it? The Sargasso Sea House or whatever, I don't know.
The House of Dark Secrets rising in the middle
House of Dark Secrets. To preserve the castles at Mont Daniel. Another one in Vacaz. What about those chalets up in the Tatan area? What about allegedly an apartment in New York? What about the mysterious or the millions of monies in mysterious accounts according to Zampoli? That is the justification, not just the preservation of someone's electoral legacy, but to preserve the caches of wealth deprived predominantly from the sale of Dominican passports, which have been hidden in mysterious places, accounts, whether in Costa Rica, whether in Switzerland, whether in other places where it cannot be accessed except by one or two hands. That is the cross that Dominica or Dominicans have been asked to bear. A pestilence of greed unleashed like an invasion of locusts on the landscape. a landscape that is being slowly strangled by its own. And what is most apparent or most obnoxious is the fact that yet we have not collectively stood up to say enough is enough. But there will come a time, as there often historically comes a time, when people rise from their slumber, when they say no more, no more, we will claim our heritage. Perhaps when you have a group of foreigners move in, don't talk too loud, Mr. Gregoire, I hope you can keep a secret. When they move into Santa Roma and they start building 6-story buildings next to the residential homes, when they move into these enclaves, wherever, Belfast, above Lubert, whatever the name is, when the threat becomes real and close and proximate to those who cherish their white picket fences, it's only then perhaps that we'll say the threat is not just in the hood, the threat is in the neighborhood. And if we don't take a stand, we will lose our everything. So inevitably, that uprising, mental, will take place. But will it be too late? I hope it isn't, because I think that we have that strength and fortitude to preserve what is ours. And if we don't have the strength and fortitude to preserve what is ours, we don't deserve to hold on to it. We might as well lose it. And unfortunately, I refuse to believe that people in Dominica have reached that stage that they have, in resignation, said, it's okay if I lose my heritage, because where else will they go? Arundel Thomas told me that Lac-Ouset Lang has a population of 1 and it's not accepting any more citizens. Where else will they go if they don't seek to protect their heritage? So there's no doubt in my mind that we will reach a stage where we'll take up the fight collectively in unity to save this sceptred isle in the Eastern Caribbean. I say good night. I say thank you for your program. Thank you for Mr. Linton, Mr. Lambie, Mr. Sherwin. I'm not seeing him, but I know he's there somewhere. Your listeners, those of you who were snacking on snout, I'm not going to call any names. I say thank you for listening. Thank you.
Well, there's only one more thing left for me to say is this, to say good night. But before I go, I just wanted to say, Dr. Andre and Lennox, I think the political parties in particular, and all of the NGOs and the civic organizations, I think there has to be some intense information and education to their followers to make them understand that if they want to preserve their interests and preserve their country and what little they have for their future generations, if they want to preserve their standard of living and their way of life, the quality of life, they're going to have to come out. They have to make that connection between the electoral reforms and good governance that could translate into income and wealth generation for them and for their children to come. And so it is important that they will have to be made to understand that at some point in time, and maybe they should not wait too long, they would need to come out in massive numbers and to peacefully express and demand the need for electoral reforms and for free and fair elections where people are accountable. It doesn't matter which party win after that. Let the chips fall where they may. But the point is that if you have the regulation laws in place, whatever political party will have an equal opportunity, just like they do in the other islands. I think that is what Dominicans should ask for. That is fair. They should demand it. They should stand for it. And I'm thinking they need to do that sooner rather than later. So let me say thanks a lot, Lennox, for turning up. Thanks, Irving. Thanks to everybody on Facebook and on YouTube and wherever you're listening in every nook and cranny in Dominica. in the region and globally. So thank you so much for staying with us tonight. And I want to tell everybody good night. Good night, Lennox and Irving.
Thank you. Good night. Good night. Good
Take
night,
care.
everyone.
See you guys.
Take care. All
Thank
the
you.
best.
Good night.
All the
Thank
best.
you.
All right.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
When I look around in the world, what do I see? I see footprints that man have left on the sand while walking through times. I see fruits of our ambition, figments of our imagination. And I ask myself, when will it end? When will it end? It is plain to see, universally this land is not bountiful as it was, simply because in this quest for success, nothing stands in man's way. All rivers run dry, soon the birds won't fly, the mountains will be no longer high. And when I really think of it, yes, I just wonder why. I see charity deplored, equal rights totally ignored, wisdom and ingenuity working in accord, simply to afford such inventions as thermonuclear warfare and environmental warfare. And I wonder now, where do we go from here? Profits everywhere, gaze upon the horizon, and the cloud of judgment will come as the savage hands of unscrupulous men defile everything passed by. Time is running out as we eat and drink species at the brink of being extinct, yeah. And I think no one can deny that the price of progress is high. Really, really high. I see consciousness abate as today we live recklessly. Money make egos inflate and thereby create a turbulent state. I see a struggle between the sexes, new hang-ups and old complexes. Now the question is, right in context, what shall be next? I've already seen this would have come divided between race, color, creed, and class. And some of the things the scripture predict, how it truthfully come to pass. Soil that wouldn't be here, children making children to be a part of this growing mass. And I ask, if this is progress, Lord, how long would it last? How long would it last? How long would it last? I see craziness increase, bogus priests and corrupt police. No peace, the struggle don't cease as man turn to drugs, searching for relief. I see a frightened humanity, a sad and confused society, and it saddens me. How shall it be in time to come? Can this world withstand this constant misuse and abuse by the hands of man as they try to shape this world in a way to fit in with all their plans? Time is running out as we eat and drink species at the brink of being extinct, yes. And I think no one can deny that the price of progress is high. Real high. Night and day are catching hell. People think I'm doing well just because I sing a few calypso. But that is my misery. Calypso don't make money, but most of them don't know that I have my axe to grind, just like any other man, existing in poverty and this giant ghetto lamb. But I intend to hang on. Tell them for me no dice. I ain't gonna eat lice. I ain't gonna grow old, sitting in the cold, not me. No way, they go have to beat me. They go have to eat me, or the heads go roll. Tell them I say I was born in this land, I go die in this land. Nobody go run me from where me come from. Nobody go run me, lad. Nobody go run me. Nobody go run me. Nobody go run me. Me mama must yam. Me papa must yam. Me woman must yam. Me picky must yam. Nobody go run me. Nobody go run me. Nobody go run me, lad. Nobody go run me. Life ain't much for us to choose. Some we win and some we lose. But sometimes life is so confusing. I had a lot of friends one time whom I used to wine and dine and gave them bread when they need it. Now most of them against me, take me, take enemy, simply because I am not what they all want me to be. And with their political views I can't agree, but tell them for me no dice. I ain't gonna eat lice, I ain't gonna grow old, sitting in the cold, not me, LG. No way, they gonna have to beat me, they gonna have to eat me, or the heads go roll. Tell them I say I was born in this land, I go die in this land. Nobody go run me from where me come from. Nobody go run me. Nobody go run me. Nobody go run me. Nobody go run me. Me mama must yam. Me papa must yam. Me woman must yam. Me pick me must yam. Nobody go run me. Nobody go run me. Let go. Well, days I at CBC, work at Halcyon for free, when they went bankrupt and had no money. Because of my tolerance, they gave me the assurance the job belongs to me. But I hear some people high in our society, they don't like my calypso because they can't control me, so they plan to kick out my ass. Tell them, party no dice. I ain't gonna eat lice, I ain't gonna grow old, sitting in the cold, not me shorty. No way, all you have to beat me, all you have to bury me more than 6 feet and more. Tell them I say I was born in this land, I go die in this land. Nobody go run me from where me come from. Nobody go run me. Nobody go run me. Nobody go run me. Nobody go run me. Me mama must yam. Me papa must yam. Me woman must yam. Me pickney must yam. Nobody go run me. Nobody go run me. Election come and gone, some of them treat me with scorn, others put the whole point against me. Tell them I don't give a damn, I am going to sing my song exactly as I see it. Whoever wants to make me a political enemy, who feel that they're playing God and could wreck the life for me, tell them I ain't running away. Tell them for me no dice. I ain't gonna eat lice, I ain't gonna grow old, sitting in the cold, not me shorty. No way, all you have to beat me, all you have to bury me more than 6 feet and more. Tell them I say I was born in this from where me come from. Nobody go run me. Nobody go run me. Nobody go run me, lad. Nobody go run me. Me mama must yam. Me papa must yam. Me woman must yam. Me people must yam.
Do you feel any sense of resentment? I mean, that must be very difficult to have months of your life taken away from you.
Yeah, that was hard. That was hard because it caused a lot of pain to me and my family. Because when I was in prison, after second month in prison, I wasn't seeing my mother coming to see me. And I was asking my other relatives, like, where's my mother? And they said, oh, if she comes here, when she gets home, she gets very frail. So we choose to advise her not to come to see you. And it wasn't true. The truth was my mother was in a hospital, hospitalized all those time when I was in prison. So I was in prison. We were separated in the government buildings, me and my mother. I was in the government building in the prison, and my mother was in the government zone hospital in Bear, you know. So even when I came out, the day I came out, my mother wasn't home, was at the hospital. So I had to go to hospital, see her. Then I took initiative to transfer her to Dar es Salaam to the National Hospital, where after a few months, she died. So that's a bad feeling I have about that experience. But other than that, I have no regret. It was good for me to know my country, because they say if you want to know a nation, go to their prisons.
It's remarkable to me that you kind of see it as a learning experience.
Yeah.
I know you were quite overt about your time in prison. You didn't kind of shy away from it. So in fact, when you came out, you started working on music, reflecting your time in prison. There was one song in particular called Number 219.
Political prisoner, man. Number 219. Yeah. That number was my prison number. Number 219 was my prison number. So when I came out, I chose to use that number to write the song explaining about what happened, about the case, what went on, life in prison, telling people it was okay, here I am and ready to say. Also, when I came out, you know, I continued to do my term in the parliament. I continued to work for my people. So I also used to wear that number, that badge, that real badge that I used to wear in the prison. I came out with it, and I was wearing it in the parliament on my suit.
How was the song perceived? How did it go down?
The government banned it. First week it came out.
So did the government essentially see it as kind of a song that could agitate?
Yes.
That could cause friction?
Yes.
And in all honesty, Sugu, was that part of your intention? Did you want to agitate?
No, I didn't want to agitate. I just wanted to share the information that people. I'm journalist like you. You use the BBC. I use the music. I'm a journalist like you. My job is to transfer information.
I get it. You know, given how charged a lot of your music was, and given the response you were getting from essentially criticizing the government, was there any part of you that ever thought, maybe I should have just stuck to the music rather than being, you know, party political?
You know, I didn't choose politics. Politics chose me almost. And for me, getting out of politics right now is like abandoning the cause. It's like abandoning the people, because the things like we are addressing, the things that we are fighting for, the justice we are trying to make noise about is not accomplished yet. So I think as long as this environment needs me, I don't think it's a good thing for me to shy away or to get away or to say enough is enough or whatever. I'm going to do it to the end till we get there.
Sugu's mission continues In 2020, he lost his seat to the ruling CCM party. Less than a year later, President Magufuli died during his second term. He was succeeded by his vice president, and since then, opposition rallies have been allowed once more. Media bans have been lifted, and Sugu is once again in the studio.
Tulijikata kitambo kwenda ng'ambo, kwenda kusaka bingo kwani bongo mambo hayakuwa mambo. Tukakoma kiwanja tukajimix kijana.
You know where you are today? How old are you today?
I'm 50, half a century now.
Today, as Sugu, as Joseph, as a 50-year-old, when you look back at your life so far, you know, there's multiple legacies. So there's the legacy of your contribution to the music scene. There's your legacy in terms of you being part of the set of people that created bongo flavor and seeing that scene, you know, evolve and take over and shift into other areas. There's also a political legacy there. I want to understand where you are today, Sugu. What would you like your legacy for your country to be?
My legacy, just to be a statesman like I am. I want to be a statesman. I want to keep this, whatever positivity I built all these years. I don't want to destroy it. And I'm enjoying that fact because just last year, May, I was celebrating my 30 years in the music industry as an artist. And I did a concert to do that. And I invited the sitting president, and she came to that concert, president of my country.
Wow, this is big. Your Excellency, Mama Samia Suluhu Hassan.
Mwenye majina mengi, Sugu, Mr. Too Proud, Jongwe, Taita, yote majina ya vijana wenzio, mimi nitakuta Joseph.
It was something very good for, not only for me, but for the respect of hip-hop music. You know, taking the president from the State House at night, and she comes to a concert, a lot of guitars and real performance for 3 hours. That was awesome. So that's the command I enjoy, like being able to do things people think I cannot do.
When can we expect another album?
Not soon, because now mostly I'm working into events. Like now I'm hosting one thing called the Bongo Flavor Hunters, where every month I host a concert for the legends who helped pave the way for this music. And it's monthly, and we have a lot of legends. It could go 3 to 4 years. So this is what I'm working on now. And I'm not doing this for money. I'm doing this for preserving music, because I discovered like people forget where this music came from, and they put all their energy celebrating new cats and stuff. So I said, I'm one of the old cats who believe there's no future without past. So I took this initiative. It's going to be monumental because it's a place where people, they can come and see and learn where this bongo flavor music came from and what sounds those old artists produce.
In good spirits, that was Tanzanian hip-hop artist and politician Sugu, also known as Joseph Mbilinyi. Thanks to Thomas Resthausen for the live recordings and archive tracks. From me, Mabin Azar, and the whole Outlook team, thanks for listening.
Hello, you're listening to BBC World Service, and now witness history with me, George Crafer. This week, we're bringing you stories all about dogs. So today, I'm taking you back 34 years to Australia when one of the world's most popular crossbreeds was created. It's 1989 in Melbourne. Dog breeder Wally Conran is looking down at a litter of puppies. They're unlike anything he's seen before.
I went to our manager and I said, we're going to have trouble with this. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, to be quite honest, I said, I've opened a Pandora box and I've produced the Frankenstein monster.
Wally has been asked to create the perfect guide dog for a blind woman in Hawaii. whose husband's allergic to long-haired dogs. It's been a tricky task, but after years of trying, he thinks he's finally cracked it.
We only got 3 in that first litter, and fortunately one of the 3, we tested the coat and the saliva and sent the results of those tests over to Hawaii to the lady's husband, and there was one in it, Sultan, he wasn't allergic to, and fortunately that dog made a guide dog. But boy, did I go through some strife getting to that stage.
But what would he call his new creation?
Well, I had to think of a name that was going to catch on, and Labradoodle seemed to be it. And the LAB from Lab and the Doodle from Poodle went together. And as I said, it was the name, I think, that started it all off. It was such a catchy name.
But in order to understand how he got to this point, we need to go back, way back to Wally's humble beginnings in 1940s Melbourne.
I always had dogs. I used to have dachshunds. I showed them. Horses were always my main interest. From the time I could walk, I was obsessed with horses. I was never obsessed with dogs until I got into the breeding at the Royal Guide Dogs. How did I get into dog breeding? Well, I was broke, out of a job, 3 kids and a mortgage. And that job came up and I didn't want it. I thought, no, can't work with dogs and I can't work with blind people. But I had to take the job, and once I got it, I got right into it and I became obsessed with it.
That obsession propelled Wally through the ranks at Guide Dogs Australia. Within a few years, he'd become their dog breeding manager. And that's where the blind woman from Hawaii comes into our story. In 1986, a letter arrived on Wally's desk. You might be thinking, why would a dog breeder almost 10,000 kilometres away be able to help a woman in Hawaii? Well, in short, it's because Australia and Hawaii had very similar quarantine restrictions, meaning getting a guide dog flown over would be a lot less hassle than if it came from other countries. But as you'll soon hear, actually finding the perfect dog was anything but hassle-free.
We got a letter from her asking if we could supply her with a guide dog that had a non-shedding hair, as her husband was allergic to the dander of the dogs.
And just in case you were wondering, dander are microscopic bits of skin that cause some people who are allergic to animals to sneeze. I had to look that one up.
My boss called me into the office and put it to me, and I said, piece of cake, a standard poodle will do that job as good as anything. It may be a bit big, but it has all the attributes that we need.
Poodles fit the bill because their fur is hypoallergenic. Basically, this means they shed less hair and cause less severe reactions to people who are allergic to dogs. But unfortunately for Wally, the poodles he tried just weren't up to the job. He tried 31 poodles over a 2-year period. One had a hip problem, another couldn't see properly, not ideal if you're going to be a guide dog, and some just didn't have the right temperament.
The boss called me back and he said, this woman's getting older. She needs a dog very quick. Do something about it. And I said, well, there's only one other thing to do. And I said, that is to use one of our best breeding bitches with a poodle. And he said, well, go ahead and do it.
He did it, and it worked. That best breeding bitch you mentioned, that was Brandy, Guide Dogs Australia's veteran golden Labrador mum, who had a proven track record for producing top guide dogs. She knew the drill, and no time was wasted getting to know a local poodle dad. And it wasn't long before the world's first Labradoodles were born. There were 3 in total, all boys, but only one of them had the right non-allergic attributes the women in Hawaii needed. He was called Sultan. And just like his mum, he didn't put a paw wrong. After 12 months of intensive training, Sultan passed his guide dog exams with flying colours. Hawaii was calling, and his new owners were ecstatic.
They loved him, and that was the start. Sultan was the first one to go to Hawaii, but by the time I retired, they had 5 Labradoodles working in Hawaii as guide dogs.
We'll come back to how Sultan got on in a minute, but what about his 2 furry brothers?